The sickening crack of 7-year-old Malik's skull against the hard plastic seatback echoed through the cabin, followed by his mother's agonizing scream. Blood streamed down the innocent boy's forehead, yet flight attendant Susan Whitmore stood over him with cold, clenched jaw contempt. Drunk on her petty authority, Susan felt utterly untouchable, confident the airline's corrupt system would bury this assault just as it had ignored all her previous abuses. But as she glared at the terrified mother, Susan was completely blind to the catastrophic reckoning she had just ignited. She had no idea multiple cameras were already rolling and that this devastating moment would trigger a historic lawsuit that would shatter her life and bring a massive corporation to its knees. Danielle Carter had almost not booked the flight. She had stood in her kitchen in Brooklyn 3 days earlier, phone in one hand, coffee in the other, going back and forth in her mind about whether to take Malik to Dallas. Her mother was recovering from hip surgery. Malik had school. The tickets were not cheap, but her mother had called that morning and said, "Danielle, I just want to see my grandbaby." And that had settled it. Danielle booked 2 seats on Flight 7, 2-8 window and middle. Malik loved the window. She packed his backpack the night before. Crayons, a coloring book with dinosaurs on the cover, his tablet loaded with cartoons, a sandwich wrapped in foil, because Malik was picky and would not eat airplane food. She packed it all carefully, the way she always did, because Danielle Carter was the kind of mother who thought about every detail. Malik was 7. He was small for his age, quiet, the kind of child teachers described as no trouble at all. He had big brown eyes and a gap-toothed smile that came out slowly, like he had to decide first if it was safe to show it. He did not throw tantrums. He did not make scenes. He sat where he was told. He said yes, ma'am, and no, sir, because Danielle had taught him that the world was not always kind to boys who looked like him, and manners were armor. They arrived at the airport early. Danielle always arrived early. She did not like rushing. She did not like the feeling of being watched when she was the last one boarding with a child. She knew what that looked like to certain people. She had felt those eyes before. At the gate, Malik sat beside her and colored quietly while they waited. He was drawing a T-Rex, green and purple, with tiny arms and big teeth. He held up the picture and said, "Mama, you think Grandma will like this?" Danielle smiled. "She is going to put it on her fridge, baby." Boarding was smooth. They found their seats. Row 22. Malik climbed in by the window and pressed his face against it. "Mama, I can see the guys with the bags," he said. "Sit back and put your seatbelt on," Danielle told him. He did. The plane filled up. Passengers shuffled down the aisle, dragging bags, bumping elbows, stuffing jackets into overhead bins. It was a full flight, every seat taken. The energy was what it always is on a full plane. Tight, impatient, everyone trying to settle in before the doors closed. That was when Danielle first noticed her. Susan Whitmore walked down the aisle like she owned it. She had a sharp face, thin lips pressed together, and a way of looking at passengers that made it clear she was already tired of them. She was not smiling. She was not greeting. She moved through the cabin with the kind of authority that dared you to ask her a question. Danielle watched her stop near a man in row 14 who had not stowed his bag properly. Susan did not ask him to fix it. She told him, "Sir, that bag cannot stay there. You need to put it under the seat, or it goes in the overhead bin. We are not waiting for you." Her tone was flat hard, like a teacher who had given up on a classroom full of children she did not like. The man blinked startled and moved his bag without a word. Susan kept walking. She passed row 22 without a glance. Danielle said nothing, but something in her chest tightened. She had seen that energy before. She recognized it. It was the energy of someone who had power in a small space and used it to remind everyone of that fact. She told herself to relax. It was going to be a 3.5-hour flight. Malik was being good. Everything was fine. The plane pushed back from the gate. The safety demonstration played. Malik watched the flight attendant at the front with wide eyes. The one holding up the seatbelt, the one who was not Susan. He said, "Mama, do they really have a slide?" "They do," Danielle said, "but we are not going to need it." "Cool," Malik said. Takeoff was smooth. The plane climbed into a gray New York sky and banked south. Malik watched the city shrink beneath them until there was nothing but clouds. Then he reached into his backpack, pulled out his coloring book, and went back to his dinosaur. Danielle closed her eyes for a moment. She had been up since 4:30. She let the hum of the engines wash over her and thought about her mother's kitchen in Dallas, the smell of cornbread, the way Malik would run through the front door and wrap himself around his grandmother's legs. She did not know that 60 minutes before this plane had left the gate, a team of executives at Hamilton and Roe Capital had gathered in a conference room in Midtown Manhattan and made a decision that would shake the airline to its core. She did not know about the $20 billion. She did not know about the whistleblower. She did not know that the airline she had trusted to carry her child across the country was already cracking from the inside. All she knew was that Malik was coloring and the flight was calm. That was enough for now. 40 minutes into the flight, the turbulence began. It came without warning. A sudden drop hard enough to rattle the overhead bins. Drinks shifted on tray tables. A woman somewhere behind them gasped. The seatbelt sign came on with a sharp ding. Malik's crayon skipped across the page. He looked up at Danielle with startled eyes. "Mama, it is just bumps, baby, like potholes in the sky. Keep your seatbelt on." Malik nodded. He gripped the armrest. The plane shook again, harder this time, a rolling, unsteady movement that made Danielle's stomach drop. She put her hand on Malik's knee and squeezed gently. "I got you," she said. The turbulence lasted about 2 minutes. When it stopped, the cabin exhaled. People went back to their screens, their books, their conversations. Malik loosened his grip on the armrest and looked down at his coloring book. The crayon had made a long green streak across the page. "My dinosaur is messed up," he said quietly. "You can start a new one on the next page," Danielle said. "Grandma will not mind." Malik shifted in his seat. He pulled his legs up, tucked them under himself the way 7-year-olds do when they are trying to get comfortable, and his knee bumped the seat in front of him once lightly. The kind of bump that happens 100 times on every flight. The man in row 21 did not react. He did not turn around. He probably did not even feel it. But Susan Whitmore saw it. She was standing in the aisle near row 18, arms crossed, watching the cabin with a hard scanning look. She had been standing there since the turbulence stopped. Not helping anyone, not checking on passengers, just standing there watching. And when Malik's knee tapped that seat back, Susan's eyes locked on him. She started walking toward row 22. Danielle did not notice at first. She was digging through Malik's backpack for a fresh page of stickers. She heard footsteps, stopped beside her, and looked up. Susan Whitmore was standing over them, staring down at Malik. "Your son is kicking the seat," Susan said. The words came out cold. Not a question, not a polite observation. An accusation. Danielle felt her body tense, but she kept her voice calm. He was not kicking. The turbulence shifted him. He just bumped the seat once. "I'm sorry about that." Susan did not move. She kept staring at Malik. "I have been watching him since boarding. He has been moving around too much." Danielle's jaw tightened. Since boarding. She had been watching her child since boarding. The word sat in Danielle's stomach like a stone. "He is 7 years old," Danielle said carefully. "He has been sitting quietly with his coloring book the entire flight. He has not caused any problems." "I will decide what is a problem," Susan said. Her voice had an edge now, something sharp and deliberate, something that was not about a seatback. Malik had stopped coloring. He was looking up at Susan with wide, frightened eyes. He did not understand what was happening. He just knew that this tall woman in the blue uniform was angry, and she was angry at him. "Mama," he whispered. Danielle put her arm around him. "It is okay, baby." "Ma'am, I need him to keep his feet on the floor and stop moving." Susan said, "If he cannot behave, I will have to report this to the captain. Report what a 7-year-old who bumped a seat during turbulence." Danielle looked Susan directly in the eyes. "My son is not misbehaving, and I would appreciate it if you would lower your voice. You are scaring him." Something flickered across Susan's face. It was not embarrassment. It was not understanding. It was anger. The kind of anger that comes from being challenged by someone you believe has no right to challenge you. "I will handle this, however I see fit," Susan said. She turned and walked back up the aisle. Danielle sat there, heart-pounding arms still around Malik. He was trembling. She could feel it through his thin t-shirt, a small, steady vibration, like a phone on silent. "Did I do something bad?" Malik asked. Those 5 words nearly broke her. "No, baby, you did not do anything wrong. Not one thing." She pulled him closer. She kissed the top of his head. She told him to go back to his coloring. But her hands were shaking and her mind was racing. She knew that energy. She had felt it in stores, in schools, in waiting rooms. The energy of someone who had already decided who you were before you said a single word. She thought about pressing the call button and asking to speak to another crew member. Would land in a couple of hours, and they would land in a couple of hours, and they would be in her mother's kitchen, and none of this would matter. She was wrong. 20 minutes passed. Malik fell asleep against the window. His coloring book open on his lap, his mouth slightly parted. Danielle watched him for a moment and felt that surge of love so strong it hurt. He was so small. He was so good. He trusted the world because she had taught him to. And right now, sitting on this airplane, she wondered if she had been wrong to do that. She reached up and adjusted the air vent so it was not blowing directly on him. She put his crayon back in the box. She closed her own eyes and tried to rest. The second round of turbulence hit harder than the first. The plane jolted violently, a sharp, sudden drop that threw unsecured items off tray tables. A coffee cup somewhere ahead hit the floor. The overhead bins rattled like they were trying to open. The seatbelt sign, which had been turned off, came back on with a frantic ding. Malik woke up with a gasp. His body jerked forward and then back. And in that involuntary movement, his knees came up and hit the seat back in front of him. Not hard, not deliberately, the same way everyone on the plane had just been thrown in their seats. The man in row 21 still did not react. He was gripping his own armrests. Eyes closed, dealing with the turbulence like everyone else. But Susan Whitmore reacted. She came down the aisle fast, not walking, moving with purpose, with something that looked like fury building in every step. Her face was tight. Her hands were clenched at her sides. Danielle saw her coming and immediately sat up. He did not do anything. It was the turbulence. He was asleep. Susan did not look at Danielle. She looked at Malik. "I told you to stop kicking," Susan said, her voice rising. Malik shrank back into his seat. Tears were already forming in his eyes. "I was sleeping," he said, his voice barely audible. "I did not kick, I promise." "Susan, he was asleep," Danielle said, standing now, one hand on Malik's shoulder, her body between her son and the flight attendant. "He just woke up because of the turbulence. Everyone moved. Look around." "Sit down," Susan ordered. "I will not sit down until you stop talking to my child like he is a criminal." The cabin was paying attention now. Heads turned. People in rows 18, 19, 20, 23, 24, all watching. A man in an aisle seat across from them pulled out his phone. Another passenger, a woman with silver hair, looked horrified. And then it happened. Susan reached past Danielle. She grabbed Malik by his shirt and the back of his head. In one violent motion, she slammed his face forward into the seat back in front of him. The sound was something no one on that plane would ever forget. A crack, sharp and wet. The sound of a child's forehead hitting a hard plastic surface with the full force of an adult's arm behind it. Malik screamed. Blood appeared almost immediately, a thin red line running down from his hairline, splitting into 2 streams above his eyebrow. His hands flew to his face. His small body crumpled in the seat. Danielle screamed a sound that came from somewhere deeper than her throat, somewhere primal, somewhere ancient. "What did you do? What did you just do to my baby?" She grabbed Malik and pulled him to her, pressing napkins from the seat pocket against his forehead. Blood soaked through in seconds. She grabbed more. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold them in place. Susan Whitmore stepped back. She straightened her uniform, and she said in a voice that was terrifyingly calm. He should have listened. The cabin erupted. A man in row 20 stood up. "Are you out of your mind?" That is a child. A woman across the aisle was already on her phone recording. I got it. I got the whole thing. Michael Reynolds, a corporate attorney sitting in row 19, had his phone out. He had started recording 30 seconds before the assault when he heard Susan's voice rising. He had captured everything. The grab, the slam, the blood, the scream. Do not delete anything, he said to the woman across the aisle. Do not stop recording. Tasha Bennett, a former Air Force medic, sitting 4 rows back, was already unbuckling her seatbelt. She grabbed her bag from under the seat and pushed her way up the aisle. I am a medic. Let me see him, she said to Danielle. Danielle looked up at her with wild, desperate eyes. She was holding Malik so tightly that Tasha had to gently peel her arm back to see the wound. It was bad. A gash along the hairline about 2 inches long, bleeding freely. Malik's eyes were glassy, unfocused. He was whimpering, but not really crying anymore, which concerned Tasha more than the blood. Sweetheart, can you look at me? Tasha said softly. Can you tell me your name, Malik? He whispered. Good, Malik. I am going to put something on your head to stop the bleeding. It might sting a little, but I need you to hold still for me. Okay. He nodded, tears streaming down his cheeks. Tasha pressed a sterile gauze pad from her kit against the wound and applied steady pressure. She looked at Danielle. He needs stitches. He may have a mild concussion. We need to land this plane. Danielle stood up, Malik still in her arms, and screamed toward the front of the cabin. I want this plane on the ground now. My son needs a hospital. I want the captain. I want the captain right now. Passengers began shouting in support. Land the plane. That woman assaulted a child. Where is the captain? Somebody get the captain. Susan Whitmore had retreated to the forward galley. She stood behind the curtain, out of sight, but the damage was already done. The recording was already on 3 phones. The blood was already on Malik's shirt. Another flight attendant, a younger woman named Rachel, came down the aisle with a first aid kit and a look of absolute shock on her face. She had not seen what happened. She had been in the back galley when Susan acted, but she could see the blood. She could see the child. Oh my God, Rachel whispered. What happened? Your colleague happened, Michael Reynolds said from row 19. She grabbed that boy and slammed his head into the seat. I have it on video. Multiple people have it on video. Rachel's face went white. She looked toward the front galley, where Susan had disappeared, then back at Malik. For a moment, she seemed frozen. I need to tell the captain, she said. You need to tell the captain to land this plane, Tasha said without looking up. This child needs medical attention that I cannot provide at 30,000 feet. Rachel nodded and hurried toward the cockpit. 5 minutes later, the captain's voice came over the intercom. It was measured, controlled, the kind of voice trained to project calm during emergencies. Ladies and gentlemen, we are aware of a situation in the cabin. We are assessing the best course of action and will update you shortly. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. That was it. No mention of a medical emergency. No mention of landing. No mention of what had just happened to a 7-year-old boy in seat 22B. Danielle was shaking. Assessing. He is assessing. My son is bleeding. Michael Reynolds unbuckled his seatbelt and walked to the front of the cabin. He knocked on the cockpit door. Rachel, who was standing outside it, tried to stop him. Sir, you cannot be up here. My name is Michael Reynolds. I am an attorney. A flight attendant on this aircraft committed felony assault on a minor. The incident is recorded on multiple devices. If this plane does not divert immediately, every minute of delay will be entered into evidence. Tell the captain that. Rachel stared at him. Then she opened the cockpit door and relayed the message. 3 minutes later, the captain came back on the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be making an unscheduled landing in St. Louis. Please prepare the cabin for descent. The plane banked left. The seatbelt sign stayed on. The cabin was heavy with silence, fury, and the quiet sound of a mother whispering to her bleeding child. I got you, baby. Mama is right here. I got you. Malik held onto her shirt with both fists. His blood had dried on her hands. She did not wipe it off. Tasha kept pressure on the wound and checked his pupils every few minutes. She spoke to him in a low, steady voice, asking him simple questions. What color is your favorite crayon? What is your dinosaur's name? She kept him talking, because if he stopped, it meant something worse was happening. Green Malik said, "His name is Rex. That is a strong name." Tasha said, "Rex is a tough dinosaur. And you know what? You are tough too." In row 23, a grandmother traveling to visit her own grandchildren in Dallas was crying silently into a napkin. She had watched everything. She had seen Susan grab that boy. She had heard the sound, and she could not stop seeing the way his small body had crumpled like a paper doll folded in half. She did not know Danielle. She did not know Malik, but she knew what she had just witnessed, and she knew it would never leave her. The plane descended through gray clouds toward St. Louis. Nobody spoke. The engines winded, the overhead bins creaked, and in the forward galley behind a thin curtain, Susan Whitmore sat on a jump seat with her hands in her lap, staring straight ahead. She had not apologized. She had not asked about the child. She had said 5 words after slamming a 7-year-old's head into a seat. 5 words that every passenger within earshot would repeat in interviews, depositions, and news segments for months to come. He should have listened. Those words were already spreading through the cabin like fire through dry brush. People whispered them to each other. They texted them to family on the ground. They typed them into social media posts that were waiting to send the moment the plane's Wi-Fi reconnected. And somewhere in a high-rise in Manhattan, the executives at Hamilton and Roe Capital, who had pulled their $20 billion investment just hours earlier, had no idea that the very thing they had been warned about was happening right now at 30,000 feet in real time on camera. The wheels touched down in St. Louis with a hard jolt. Paramedics were waiting at the gate. The jetway door opened, and 2 EMTs came on board. They moved quickly to row 22. Malik looked up at them with tired, frightened eyes. There was dried blood on his forehead, on his shirt, on his mother's hands. "Hey, buddy," one of the EMTs said gently. "We are going to take real good care of you." Danielle carried him off the plane herself. She would not let anyone else hold him. She walked down that jetway with her son in her arms and blood on her clothes and 200 passengers watching her go. Nobody clapped. Nobody cheered. This was not that kind of moment. This was the kind of moment where you stand in the aisle of an airplane and realize that something terrible has happened and nothing about the world that let it happen has changed yet. But it was about to, because Michael Reynolds had already emailed the video to his law firm, because Tasha Bennett had already written a detailed medical assessment on the back of a boarding pass, because 14 passengers had already recorded what happened from 14 different angles. And because Danielle Carter, standing in a St. Louis airport with a bleeding child in her arms, was not going to let this go. She was not going to accept an apology. She was not going to take a voucher. She was not going to be quiet. She looked down at Malik, who was holding his dinosaur coloring book against his chest, like a shield. And she made a promise not out loud, not to anyone else, just to herself and to him. They would answer for this, every single one of them. The paramedics moved fast. They had Malik on a stretcher within 90 seconds of Danielle stepping off the jetway. He was still holding his coloring book. He would not let go of it, gripping the pages so hard they wrinkled under his small fingers. Danielle walked beside the stretcher, one hand on his chest, refusing to break contact. "Ma'am, we need to get an IV started," the lead EMT said. "Has he lost consciousness at any point?" "I do not know," Danielle said, and her voice cracked, because that was the truth that terrified her. She had been so focused on the blood, so focused on holding him, that she could not say for certain whether his eyes had closed during those minutes in the air. Tasha, the medic on the plane, she said he might have a concussion. She said he needs stitches. "We are going to take good care of him," the EMT said. They loaded Malik into the ambulance. Danielle climbed in beside him. The doors closed and the siren started. And that sound, that wailing sound, cutting through the St. Louis afternoon, hit Danielle like a wall. Her son was in an ambulance. Her 7-year-old son was in an ambulance because a grown woman in a uniform had grabbed him and smashed his face into a seat on an airplane. She looked down at her hands. Malik's blood had dried in the creases of her palms. Dark brown lines that looked like they had been drawn there. "Mama, my head hurts," Malik said. "I know, baby. The doctors are going to fix it. Am I in trouble?" That question nearly destroyed her. A child who had been assaulted by an adult, lying on a stretcher with blood on his face, and his first thought was whether he was the one who had done something wrong. "No," Danielle said, and she leaned down and pressed her forehead gently against his. "You are not in trouble. You will never be in trouble for this. Do you hear me?" He nodded, just barely. The ambulance pulled into the emergency bay at St. Louis Children's Hospital at 4:47 in the afternoon. Malik was wheeled into a trauma room. A doctor, a young woman with kind eyes and steady hands, examined the wound and confirmed what Tasha had said on the plane. A 2-inch laceration along the hairline, mild concussion. The wound needed 7 stitches. 7 stitches. Malik was 7 years old. 1 stitch for every year of his life. Danielle stood in the corner of the room while the doctor worked, arms wrapped around herself, watching her son lie still on a hospital bed while a needle pulled thread through his skin. He whimpered, but did not cry. He stared at the ceiling and squeezed a nurse's hand and said nothing. He was being brave, and that broke Danielle more than the screaming had. When the doctor finished, she turned to Danielle with a careful expression. "Mrs. Carter, the wound is closed. The concussion appears mild, but we want to monitor him for a few hours. I need to ask you some questions about how this happened." Danielle told her every word. From the moment Susan first approached them to the moment she grabbed Malik and slammed him forward, she told it calmly, precisely. The way you tell a story, when you know every syllable matters. The doctor listened without interrupting. When Danielle finished, the doctor said, "I am required to report this to the police. An injury like this to a minor inflicted by an adult is a mandatory report." "Good," Danielle said. "Report it." At 5:15, 2 St. Louis Metro police officers arrived at the hospital. They were professional, polite, and thorough. Danielle gave her statement again. She gave them the flight number, the seat number, Susan Whitmore's name, the names of witnesses she could remember. "There are videos," Danielle said. "Multiple passengers recorded it. A man named Michael Reynolds. He is a lawyer. He was in row 19. He got the whole thing. Flight crew tried to cover it up." Flight crew tried to cover it up, Danielle said. "The captain refused to land the plane, at first. They called it a misunderstanding. You need to know that the officer looked at her for a long moment, then wrote that down too." At 6:22, Danielle's phone buzzed. It was a text from a number she did not recognize. It read, "Miss Carter, my name is Michael Reynolds. I was on your flight. I recorded what happened to your son. I am an attorney. If you need help, please call me." She called him immediately. Michael answered on the first ring. "Ms. Carter, how is your son?" 7 stitches concussion. He is asking me if he did something wrong." Her voice broke on the last word. Michael was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have the full video. 42 seconds from the moment she grabbed him to the moment she stepped away. It is clear. It is unobstructed. And it shows everything. I have already backed it up in 3 locations. The airline cannot make this disappear." "What do I do?" Danielle asked. "You do not talk to the airline. Not yet. Do not accept any calls from them. Do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything. If they contact you, you tell them to speak to your attorney." "I do not have an attorney." "You do now," Michael said. "I am not the right lawyer for this case, but I know who is. Her name is Vanessa Cole. She is one of the best civil rights attorneys in the country. I have already called her. She is expecting to hear from you tonight." Danielle closed her eyes. 15 minutes ago, she had been standing in a hospital room watching her son get stitches. Now she had a lawyer, a video, and the beginning of something she could not yet see the shape of. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "Because I watched a grown woman assault a child, and then say he should have listened," Michael said. "And because I have a son too. He is 9, and if that had been him in that seat, I would want someone to help me." At 7:05, the first video hit social media. It was not Michael's. It was from a passenger in row 23, a college student named Brianna Foley, who had been filming the turbulence for her Instagram story. She had captured the entire assault from a slightly elevated angle. The video was 16 seconds long. It showed Susan reaching past Danielle, grabbing Malik the slam the blood, and then Danielle's scream. Brianna posted it with one sentence. "A flight attendant just did this to a 7-year-old on my flight." Within 40 minutes, the video had been shared 11,000 times. By 8 o'clock, it had crossed 100,000 views. By 9 o'clock, it was on every major news site in the country. The comments came in like a flood. Rage, disbelief, calls for arrest, calls for boycott. People tagged the airline. People tagged the FAA. People tagged Congress. The hashtag flight attendant assault started trending at 8:47. By 9:15, it was the #1 trending topic in the United States, and the airline had not said a single word. At 9:30, Danielle was still at the hospital. Malik had been moved to an observation room. He was sleeping finally with a bandage on his forehead and his coloring book tucked under his arm. Danielle sat beside him in a hard plastic chair, her phone vibrating nonstop with calls from numbers she did not know. Reporters, producers, someone from a morning show, someone from a cable news network. She did not answer any of them. Instead, she called Vanessa Cole. Vanessa answered with a voice that was warm but direct. "Miss Carter, Michael Reynolds briefed me on everything. I have seen the video. How is your son doing right now? He is sleeping. The doctor says the concussion is mild, but they want to watch him overnight." "Good. Now listen to me carefully. What happened to Malik is going to become a national story. It is already becoming one. The airline is going to try to get ahead of this. They are going to call you. They are going to send someone to that hospital tonight with an apology and a check. They are going to ask you to sign something. Do not let anyone in that room who is not a doctor or a police officer. Do you understand? Yes. I am flying to St. Louis first thing in the morning. Until then, say nothing to the press. Nothing to the airline. Nothing to anyone except the police," Vanessa Danielle said, and her voice was steady, now harder than it had been all day. "I do not want a check. I want them held accountable. I want that woman charged, and I want to know why the airline let someone with a history of complaints work around families and children." There was a pause on the other end. Then Vanessa said, "Michael told me you were strong. He was right. We are going to hold them accountable, Danielle. Every single one of them." At 10:15, the airline finally released a statement. It was 4 sentences long. It said the airline was aware of an incident on Flight 728. It said the company was committed to the safety of all passengers. It said an internal review had been initiated. It said no further comment would be made at this time. 4 sentences. A child had been assaulted, and they responded with 4 sentences that said absolutely nothing. The internet exploded. People called it a cover-up. People called it corporate cowardice. Legal analysts on cable news said the statement was written by lawyers trying to minimize liability. A former airline executive went on television and said, "This is the worst crisis response I have seen in 30 years in this industry." And then at 10:52, someone leaked the first internal email. It came from an anonymous source inside the airline. It was an email from Susan Whitmore's supervisor, dated 14 months earlier, summarizing a complaint from a passenger, a Latina mother traveling with her 2 children, who said Susan had grabbed her daughter's arm hard enough to leave a bruise during a dispute over a reclined seat. The email concluded with a single line: "Complaint reviewed, no action taken." No action taken. When that email hit Twitter at 11:08, the story changed. It was no longer about one incident. It was about a pattern. People started asking the question that the airline did not want anyone to ask. How many times had Susan Whitmore done this before? And how many times had the airline looked the other way? By midnight, 3 more passengers from Flight 728 had uploaded their own videos, each one from a different angle, each one showing the same thing. Susan grabbing a child, the impact, the blood, the mother's scream. In one video, you could hear Susan say, "He should have listened." In another, You could see her walk away and straighten her uniform, smooth the fabric, like she was brushing off crumbs. That detail, the straightening of the uniform, became its own viral moment. People watched it over and over. They screenshotted the frame where her hands smoothed the fabric, while a child bled behind her. It became the image of everything wrong with the airline, with the system, with a kind of authority that hurts the powerless, and then adjusts its appearance as if nothing happened. At 12:30 in the morning, Danielle was still awake. Malik was asleep in the hospital bed. The room was quiet, except for the beep of a monitor and the hum of fluorescent lights. Her phone screen glowed with notifications she had stopped reading. She was looking at her son's face, the bandage, the small bruise forming around the edges of the wound, the way his hand twitched in his sleep, the way it had been twitching since the plane. She thought about the morning. She thought about packing his backpack, the crayons, the sandwich wrapped in foil, the way he had held up his dinosaur drawing, and asked if Grandma would like it. She thought about Susan Whitmore, standing over them in the aisle, saying she had been watching Malik since boarding. Since boarding, before the turbulence, before the bump, before any excuse Susan would later try to offer. She had been watching Danielle's son from the moment they stepped on that plane. And Danielle knew why. And the knowing sat in her chest like a stone that would never dissolve. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was her mother in Dallas. "Baby, are you okay? I just saw the news. Is Malik okay?" What happened? Danielle almost held it together. Almost. But the sound of her mother's voice, the worry, the love, the fear broke through everything she had been holding in. She cried for the first time since it happened. She cried, not the sharp, reactive scream from the plane. This was deeper. This was the kind of crying that comes when you are safe enough to feel what you have been pushing away. "Mama, she hurt my baby." Danielle said she hurt him, and then she walked away like he was nothing. "I am calling your brother. He is going to drive to St. Louis tonight. You should not be alone." "I am not alone, Mama. I have Malik." "Danielle, you should not be alone." Her brother Marcus arrived at the hospital at 3:45 in the morning. He had driven 4 hours from Dallas without stopping. He walked into the room, saw Malik asleep with the bandage on his head, and his jaw tightened so hard Danielle could hear his teeth. "Tell me everything," he said. She did again. The third time she had told the story that day. Each time it got both easier and harder, easier because the words were becoming routine, harder because each telling made it more real. Marcus listened. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he said, "What do you need?" "I need this to not have happened," Danielle said. "What else? I need them to answer for it. Not just her, all of them. The airline, the captain who would not land the plane, the people who let her keep working. After the other complaints, all of them." Marcus nodded. "Then that is what we do." At 6 o'clock in the morning, as pale light came through the hospital window, Danielle's phone rang again. It was a blocked number. She almost did not answer, but something made her pick up. "Miss Carter, this is Thomas Caldwell. I am the CEO of the airline." Danielle sat up straight. She looked at Marcus, who was dozing in a chair across the room. She mouthed the words, "The CEO." Marcus was on his feet instantly. "Miss Carter, I want you to know that I am personally devastated by what happened to your son. This does not represent who we are as a company. I am calling to tell you that Susan Whitmore has been suspended pending a full investigation, and I want to offer our full support for Malik's medical care." Danielle was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she said, "Mr. Caldwell, did you know that Susan Whitmore had 2 prior complaints involving minority families?" Silence on the other end. "Did you know that both of those complaints were dismissed internally with no disciplinary action?" More silence. "Did you know that one of those complaints described her grabbing a child?" Thomas Caldwell cleared his throat. "Miss Carter, I understand you are upset, and I assure you that our investigation will be thorough and transparent. Your investigation is too late." Danielle said, "You are calling me because there is a video. If there were no video, you would not know my name. If there were no video, your airline would have filed this under misunderstanding, and my son would have been another complaint that got dismissed." She could hear him breathing on the other end. He had no answer for that, because there was no answer for that. "Do not call me again," Danielle said. "Talk to my attorney. Her name is Vanessa Cole." She hung up. Marcus looked at her from across the room. "You just told the CEO of a major airline to talk to your lawyer." "Yes, I did. Good." At 7:20 in the morning, the story crossed international borders. BBC picked it up. Reuters ran a wire piece. Outlets in London, Paris, Tokyo, and Johannesburg were covering the video of a flight attendant slamming a black child's head into an airplane seat. The hashtag was trending in 12 countries. And then, at 7:41, a financial reporter at Bloomberg published something that changed the entire shape of the story. The headline was simple. It said that Hamilton and Rowe Capital had withdrawn a $20 billion investment from the airline. Approximately 1 hour before Flight 728 departed from New York, $20 billion, gone 60 minutes before the assault. The article cited anonymous sources within Hamilton and Rowe who said the withdrawal was not, as previously rumored, related to market conditions. It was triggered by a confidential whistleblower report alleging systemic discrimination in the airline's customer service division. When Danielle read that article on her phone, sitting beside her sleeping son in a hospital room in St. Louis, she felt something shift inside her. It was not just anger anymore. It was clarity. This was not one flight attendant with a bad temper. This was not one bad day. This was a system, a structure, a culture that had been warned, that had been told, that had been given every chance to change, and had chosen not to. $20 billion pulled because investors knew what was happening inside this airline. And 1 hour later, the proof walked down the aisle in a blue uniform and slammed a child's face into a seat. Malik stirred in his sleep. His hand reached out and found Danielle's arm. He held on without waking his small fingers, curling around her wrist. She did not move. She sat there in that hospital chair, watching her son hold on to her, watching the morning light spread across the room, and she made a decision. She was not going to let this story be told by the airline's PR team. She was not going to let Thomas Caldwell control the narrative with words like devastated and thorough investigation. She was not going to let them turn her son into a statistic or a settlement number. She was going to tell this story herself, and the world was going to listen. Vanessa Cole landed in St. Louis at 8:45 that morning. She did not go to her hotel. She did not stop for coffee. She took a cab straight from the airport to St. Louis Children's Hospital and walked into Malik's room carrying a leather briefcase and the kind of quiet fury that comes from 30 years of fighting battles most people do not even know exist. Danielle stood when she walked in. Marcus stood too. Vanessa looked at both of them, then looked at Malik, who was sitting up in the hospital bed, now eating orange gel, with a plastic spoon, the bandage on his forehead bright white against his dark skin. "You must be Malik," Vanessa said. He looked up at her. "Yes, ma'am." "I like your dinosaur book," she said, nodding at the coloring book on the bedside table. "Thank you. I messed up the green one, but I am making a new one." Vanessa smiled, but her eyes were not smiling. They were calculating. She turned to Danielle. "Can we talk in the hallway?" They stepped outside. Marcus stayed with Malik. "I have spent the last 4 hours on the phone," Vanessa said. "Here is where we stand." The video has been viewed over 9 million times across platforms. CNN, MSNBC, Fox, ABC, CBS, they all want interviews. The airline stock dropped 4% in pre-market trading this morning, which does not sound like much until you realize that 4% of this company is worth roughly $3 billion. $3 billion gone before the markets even opened. Danielle leaned against the wall. What about Susan Whitmore suspended with pay? With pay for now, the airline is treating this as an internal matter, which is their way of trying to control it. But the St. Louis's police have opened a criminal investigation based on your statement and the video evidence. Michael Reynolds has already provided his recording to the police and has offered to testify. I spoke with him an hour ago. What about the other complaints? Danielle asked the ones before Malik, the email that got leaked. Vanessa opened her briefcase and pulled out a printed sheet. "This is where it gets worse, Danielle. I have a source inside the airline, someone I have worked with before on a discrimination case 4 years ago. That person contacted me at 6 this morning. Susan Whitmore did not have 2 prior complaints. She had 5. Danielle's knees went soft. She pressed harder against the wall. 5 complaints over 3 years, Vanessa continued. 2 involving minority families, which we already knew about from the leaked email, but 3 more were filed internally by other flight attendants who witnessed aggressive behavior toward passengers. One report described Susan pulling a bag out of an elderly woman's hands so hard the woman stumbled into a seat. Another described Susan screaming at a Middle Eastern couple during boarding over a car seat that was the correct size for the aircraft. The third was from a flight attendant named Rachel Torres, who wrote that she felt unsafe working with Susan because of her, and I am quoting the report here, unpredictable hostility towards certain passengers. Rachel Danielle said, "There was a Rachel on our flight. Young woman, she came to help after it happened. She looked shocked. Same person." Vanessa said Rachel Torres filed that complaint 9 months ago. The airline's response was a single counseling session for Susan and a note in her file that said, "Resolved." "Resolved," Danielle repeated. The word tasted like metal. 5 complaints, 5 opportunities for this airline to remove a dangerous employee, 5 chances to protect passengers, and every single time they chose to protect the employee instead. That pattern, Danielle, is what turns this from an assault case into a federal civil rights case. Danielle looked through the small window in the door at Malik, who was showing Marcus his new dinosaur drawing. The boy's hand moved carefully across the page, staying inside the lines. "File it," Danielle said. "File everything." At 10:15 that morning, the airline CEO Thomas Caldwell held a press conference at the company's headquarters in Dallas. He stood behind a podium with the airline's logo behind him and read from a prepared statement. He called the incident deeply disturbing. He said the airline had 0 tolerance for any behavior that endangers passengers. He announced that Susan Whitmore had been terminated effective immediately. A reporter in the front row asked, "Mr. Caldwell, were you aware that Susan Whitmore had multiple prior complaints before this incident?" Caldwell paused. His press handler leaned toward him and whispered something. Caldwell adjusted his tie and said, "We are conducting a thorough review of all internal records related to this employee." "That is not what I asked," the reporter said. "Were you aware of the prior complaints, yes or no?" "I was not personally aware of every employee complaint across our organization, but your company was aware. Your HR department had those complaints on file. Is that correct?" Another pause. Longer this time. "I cannot speak to specific HR records at this time." The reporter pressed harder. "Mr. Caldwell, a leaked email shows that a complaint against Susan Whitmore involving a child was dismissed with no action taken 14 months ago. If the airline had acted on that complaint, Malik Carter might not be in a hospital right now. Do you take responsibility for that?" Thomas Caldwell's face tightened. For the first time, the corporate mask cracked just enough for something real to show through. It was not remorse, it was fear. "We take full responsibility for the safety of our passengers, and we are committed to making the changes necessary to ensure this never happens again." He took no more questions. He left the podium. The press conference had lasted 7 minutes. By 11 o'clock, legal analysts on every network were tearing the press conference apart. He did not answer a single direct question. One analyst said he did not apologize to the family by name. He did not address the prior complaints. This was a man trying to stop the bleeding without admitting there was a wound. At 11:20, Vanessa Cole filed a federal lawsuit on behalf of Malik and Danielle Carter against the airline Susan Whitmore individually and 3 unnamed supervisors responsible for dismissing prior complaints. The lawsuit alleged assault negligence failure to protect a minor racial discrimination and deliberate indifference to a pattern of employee misconduct. The damages sought were $250 million. When the filing hit the news at noon, the airline stock dropped another 6%. At 12:30, something happened that nobody expected. A woman named Gloria Mendes called Vanessa Cole's office. Gloria was the Latina mother from 14 months ago, the one whose complaint about Susan grabbing her daughter's arm had been dismissed. She had seen the video of Malik. She had seen the leaked email, and she was crying when she called. That email was my complaint. Gloria said that was about my daughter Sophia. She was 5 years old. Susan Whitmore grabbed her arm so hard it left a bruise that lasted 2 weeks. I filed a complaint. I gave them photos of the bruise. I gave them my daughter's pediatrician records, and they told me the matter had been reviewed and resolved. Resolved. My daughter had nightmares for 6 months. She still will not fly. Vanessa asked Gloria if she would be willing to join the lawsuit or provide testimony. I will do whatever it takes, Gloria said, because if they had listened to me 14 months ago, that little boy on that plane would not have been hurt. By 1-0, Vanessa had Gloria's full statement, Sophia's medical records, and the original complaint documentation that Gloria had kept copies of. The case was no longer about one incident. It was about a pattern that the airline had known about, documented, and deliberately ignored. At 1:45, the Department of Transportation issued a formal statement announcing an investigation into the airline's customer service practices, employee oversight protocols, and internal complaint handling procedures. The DOT statement used a word that sent a shockwave through the airline industry. It said the investigation would examine whether the airline had engaged in systemic failures. Systemic, not isolated, not individual systemic. At 2 o'clock, Danielle's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Turn on CNN right now. Danielle found the television remote in Malik's room and turned it on. Malik was napping. Marcus was sitting in the chair reading something on his phone, but he looked up when the TV came on. On the screen, a news anchor was interviewing a man named David Hargrove, a former senior vice president of the airline who had left the company 2 years earlier. Hargrove was sitting in a studio, with the kind of calm that comes from having nothing left to lose. I raised concerns about the crew management culture before I left. Hargrove said there was a pattern of protecting employees with seniority, regardless of their conduct. Complaints from passengers, especially minority passengers, were routinely downgraded or dismissed. I brought this to the board. I was told it was being handled. It was not being handled. I left because I could not be part of it anymore. The anchor asked, "Were you aware of Susan Whitmore specifically?" Not by name, but I was aware that there were crew members with repeated complaints who remained on active duty because removing them would trigger union grievances and internal disruption. The company made a financial calculation. It was cheaper to ignore complaints than to deal with the fallout of disciplining senior staff. That calculation is what put that child in the hospital. Marcus looked at Danielle. A financial calculation. Danielle did not respond. She was watching the screen, but her eyes were somewhere else. She was thinking about the moment on the plane when Susan had said, "I have been watching him since boarding." She was thinking about the way Susan's eyes had locked on Malik, the way you lock on something you have already decided about. She was thinking about the 5 complaints, the 5 chances, and the 5 times a corporation had weighed the cost of doing the right thing and decided it was too expensive. At 2:40, Vanessa called. "Danielle, I need you to sit down for this one." "I am sitting." "The whistleblower report, the one that caused Hamilton and Rowe to pull the $20 billion investment. I just got a copy." Danielle's grip tightened on the phone. How a journalist at Bloomberg received it from a source and shared it with me under the condition that we do not reveal the whistleblower's identity. Danielle, the report is 47 pages long. It was written by someone inside the airline's customer service division. It documents over 60 incidents of discriminatory behavior by airline staff over a 2-year period. Verbal abuse, physical intimidation, unequal enforcement of rules, racial profiling during boarding and seating. 60 incidents. And the report named Susan Whitmore in 3 of them. Danielle closed her eyes. 60 incidents. The whistleblower sent this report to Hamilton and Rowe because they had tried going through internal channels first. They filed it with HR. They filed it with the VP of Operations. They even sent a summary to the CEO's office. Every time they were told it was being reviewed, nothing changed. So they went outside the company. They went to the investors. And when Hamilton and Rowe read what was in that report, they pulled $20 billion out of the airline in one day. 1 hour before my son's flight, Danielle said. 1 hour before your son's flight, Vanessa confirmed. Danielle, this report is the spine of our case. It proves the airline knew not suspected, not should have known knew. They had the documentation. They had the complaints. They had a 47-page report sitting in 3 different offices, and they did nothing. And then Susan Whitmore walked down the aisle of Flight 728 and proved every word of that report true. At 3:15, the first board member resigned. His name was Gerald Pratt, and he had served on the airlines board for 11 years. His resignation letter was 1 paragraph. It said he could no longer serve an organization that had failed to act on documented evidence of systemic misconduct. He wished the Carter family a full recovery. By 4 o'clock, a second board member resigned, then a third. The airline stock, which had opened the day down 4%, was now down 11%. Analysts were calling it a corporate freefall. One commentator on CNBC said this is not a PR crisis. This is an existential crisis. The question is not whether the airline will recover. The question is whether it survives in its current form. At 4:30, Danielle received a call from an unknown number. She almost did not answer. She had been ignoring unknown numbers all day, but something made her pick up. Miss Carter, please do not hang up. My name is Catherine Rowe. I am the managing partner of Hamilton and Rowe Capital. Danielle went still. I am calling you personally because I want you to know something. When we received the whistleblower report, we acted immediately. We pulled our investment because the values reflected in that report were incompatible with who we are as a firm. But I want you to understand, Miss Carter, we pulled the money to send a message to the airline's leadership. We did not know what would happen on that flight. No one could have known. And I have not slept since I saw that video because I keep thinking about what might have been different if we had gone public with the report instead of pulling the money quietly. Why did you not go public? Danielle asked. Because we were protecting the whistleblower. Going public would have exposed their identity. We thought pulling the investment would force the airline to act internally. We were wrong. They did not act. And now your son has paid the price for their failure. My son paid the price for a lot of failures. Danielle said, yours is just one of them. Catherine Rowe was quiet for a long moment. You are right, and I want to make it right. Hamilton and Rowe will make the full whistleblower report available to your legal team and to the Department of Transportation. We will cooperate fully with any investigation. And Miss Carter, our $20 billion investment will remain frozen until this airline proves not promises, proves that it has fundamentally changed. Thank you, Danielle said. But I need you to understand something, Ms. Rowe. You pulled $20 billion, and it did not protect my child. All the money in the world did not stop a woman from grabbing my son by the head and slamming him into a seat. Money does not fix what is broken here. People fix it. Decisions fix it. What happens next fixes it. Catherine Rose said, I know. Dash. At 5 o'clock, Malik woke up from his nap. He looked at Danielle, at Marcus, at the television that was now muted, but still showing footage of the airline's headquarters and pictures of his own face, the school photo Danielle had posted on Facebook last September, the one where he was smiling with his gap-toothed grin. Mama, he said, looking at the screen. That is me. Danielle grabbed the remote and turned the TV off. Yes, baby, a lot of people are talking about what happened to you. Are they mad at me? No, sweetheart, they are mad for you. There is a difference. Malik thought about that. Then he said, is the lady going to get in trouble? Danielle looked at her son, this small, quiet, 7-year-old boy, who had been so thoroughly good his entire life that even now his framework for understanding it was trouble. Getting in trouble, the language of childhood, where the worst thing you can imagine is being sent to the principal's office. Yes, Danielle said she is going to be held accountable for what she did. good, Malik said. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with the simple, clean clarity of a child who knows the difference between right and wrong, even when adults have forgotten it. At 6 o'clock, the St. Louis County prosecutor announced that a warrant had been issued for the arrest of Susan Whitmore on charges of felony assault of a minor and endangering the welfare of a child. At 6:22, Susan Whitmore was arrested at her home in Queens, New York. She was taken into custody without incident. She said nothing to the officers. She said nothing to the cameras outside her door. She was booked fingerprinted and held pending arraignment. The mugshot was released at 7 o'clock. It showed a woman with thin lips and hollow eyes, staring straight into the camera with an expression that was not remorse, not defiance, but something in between, something empty. It was the face of a person who had spent years being protected by a system and was now standing in the one place that system could not reach. When Danielle saw the mugshot, she felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not relief, not anger, just a vast, tired emptiness, like she had been running for 2 days and had finally stopped and realized how far she had come and how far she still had to go. She looked at Malik. He was coloring again, a new dinosaur blue this time. "What is this one's name?" she asked. "Justice," Malik said. He did not look up from the page. He just kept coloring, staying carefully inside the lines the way he always did. At 8 o'clock that night, Vanessa Cole held a press conference outside the hospital. Danielle stood beside her. Marcus stood behind them. Cameras flashed. Microphones were held forward. Reporters shouted questions. Vanessa spoke first. She outlined the lawsuit. She described the pattern of complaints. She referenced the whistleblower report without revealing the whistleblower's identity. She named every failure, every dismissal, every decision that had led to a 7-year-old boy bleeding on an airplane. Then she turned to Danielle. Danielle stepped to the microphone. She had not prepared a speech. She had not written anything down. She looked into the cameras and spoke. "My son's name is Malik Carter. He is 7 years old. He likes dinosaurs and the color green and drawing pictures for his grandmother. 2 days ago, he was sitting on an airplane with his coloring book in his lap, doing nothing wrong, bothering no one. And a grown woman in a position of authority grabbed him and slammed his head into a seat hard enough to split his forehead open. He needed 7 stitches. He has a concussion. He asked me every day if he did something wrong." She paused. The cameras clicked. This airline had 5 complaints about this woman, 5 chances to stop her. A 47-page report sat on the desks of executives documenting a pattern of discrimination. $20 billion was pulled by investors who saw what was happening. And still, nobody protected my child. Nobody stood between him and that woman. So I am standing here now, and I am telling every parent watching this, every grandmother, every uncle, every person who has ever loved a child, this is not over. This will not be swept away with a press conference and a corporate apology. My son bled on that airplane, and someone is going to answer for every drop. She did not take questions. She turned and walked back into the hospital. And in that moment, standing in the elevator with Marcus, watching the doors close on the noise and the lights and the shouting. Danielle Carter was no longer just a mother from Brooklyn whose son had been hurt on a flight. She was the face of a reckoning that the airline and everyone connected to it could no longer outrun. Malik was discharged from the hospital at 9 the next morning. The doctors cleared him with instructions for concussion monitoring, a follow-up appointment in 1 week, and a prescription for children's pain medication. Danielle signed the papers, packed his coloring book into his backpack, and carried him out through a side entrance because the front of the hospital was surrounded by news vans and reporters who had been camped there since midnight. Marcus had pulled the rental car around to the loading dock. Danielle put Malik in the back seat, buckled him in, and climbed in beside him. Marcus drove. Nobody spoke for the first 10 minutes. Then Malik said, "Are we going to Grandma's house now?" "Yes, baby, we are going to Grandma's house." "Will she be mad about my head?" "She is going to hug you so tight you cannot breathe." Danielle said, "That is what Grandma does." Malik smiled the first real smile since the plane. It was small and careful, like he was testing whether smiling was still allowed after everything that had happened. Danielle saw it and held on to it like a lifeline. They arrived in Dallas at 2:15 in the afternoon. Marcus had driven straight through 4.5 hours, stopping only once for gas and a bathroom break. Danielle's mother, Loretta, was standing on the front porch when they pulled into the driveway. She was leaning on a cane from her hip surgery. But when she saw Malik climb out of the car, she dropped the cane and walked down the steps like there was nothing wrong with her body at all. She got to Malik and dropped to her knees on the concrete and pulled him into her arms and held him. She did not say anything for a long time. She just held him. And Malik held her back, his face buried in her shoulder, his small arms wrapped around her neck. When Loretta finally pulled back, she looked at the bandage on his forehead, and her face changed. Something hardened behind her eyes, something ancient and fierce. The look of a woman who had spent her whole life watching the world hurt the people she loved and had never once stopped fighting it. "Come inside," Loretta said. "I made cornbread." They went inside. Malik ate cornbread and drank apple juice and sat on the living room floor, drawing dinosaurs, while the adults gathered in the kitchen and talked in low voices. "How bad is it out there?" Loretta asked. "It is everywhere, Mama," Danielle said. "Every channel, every website. My phone has not stopped ringing." "Good." Loretta said, "Let them ring. Let the whole world see what they did." At 3 o'clock, Vanessa Cole called with an update. She was back in New York working out of her firm's office, and she had been on the phone all morning with the Department of Transportation, the airline's legal team, and 3 different news organizations. "Danielle, the airline wants to settle," Vanessa said. Danielle felt her stomach tighten already. "They are scared. The stock is in free fall. 2 more board members resigned this morning. That makes 5 total. The DOT investigation is expanding. They want this to go away. How much they are offering: $50 million full medical coverage for Malik for life, a public apology from the CEO, and a commitment to reform their employee oversight policies." $50 million. Danielle leaned against the kitchen counter and closed her eyes. $50 million was more money than she could comprehend. It was generational wealth. It was security for Malik for the rest of his life. It was everything she had never had. "What do you think?" Danielle asked. Vanessa's answer was immediate. "I think they are offering 50 because they know the case is worth 5 times that. I think they are offering it fast because they do not want discovery. They do not want us subpoenaing internal documents. They do not want depositions of board members and executives who knew about the complaints and did nothing. Danielle, if we go to trial, we will get access to everything. Every email, every memo, every meeting where someone decided to look the other way. And if we take the 50, then they write a check issue, a statement, and in 6 months, nobody remembers. The structures that allowed this to happen stay in place. The people who made the decisions that led to your son being hurt keep their jobs and their pensions. Susan Whitmore becomes the scapegoat, the one bad apple, and the orchard keeps growing the same rotten fruit." Danielle opened her eyes. She looked through the kitchen doorway at Malik, who was lying on his stomach on the living room floor, coloring with his tongue sticking out of the corner of his mouth, the way it always did when he was concentrating. The bandage on his forehead was starting to peel at the edges. "Reject it," Danielle said. "Are you sure? I told you from the beginning, I do not want a check. I want accountability. Every person who ignored those complaints, every executive who read that whistleblower report and did nothing, every decision that led to that woman being on my son's flight, I want it all in the open. Reject the offer." Vanessa said, "I was hoping you would say that." At 4 o'clock, the airline's legal team received Vanessa's rejection of the settlement offer. Within an hour, they came back with a revised offer, $75 million, same terms. Vanessa rejected it without calling Danielle. She already had her answer. At 5:30, news broke that the airline's chief operating officer, a man named Richard Spence, had resigned. Unlike the board members who had released careful diplomatic statements, Spence went on the record with a reporter at the Wall Street Journal. He said he had raised concerns about the airline's complaint handling system 18 months ago and had been told by the CEO to let HR handle it. He said he had pushed for a review of crew members with multiple complaints and had been overruled by the head of labor relations, who argued it would trigger union disputes. I was told the cost of addressing the problem was greater than the cost of the problem itself. Spence said that calculation was made by people who never had to sit across from a mother holding a bleeding child. When Danielle read Spence's interview on her phone, she called Vanessa. "Did you see it?" "I saw it, and I want him on our witness list." "Will he testify?" "I spoke with his attorney 20 minutes ago. He will testify. He has emails, he has meeting notes, he has a paper trail that goes all the way to the CEO's office. Danielle, this is going to blow the case wide open." At 6 o'clock that evening, Thomas Caldwell held his second press conference. This one was different. He was not standing behind a podium. He was sitting at a long table with 3 remaining board members flanking him. His tie was loosened. There were circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who had not slept in 3 days and had realized that no amount of corporate language was going to save him. "I want to address the American people directly." Caldwell said the events on Flight 728 represent a failure at every level of this organization. Not just the actions of one employee, but the systems and decisions that allowed those actions to occur. "I take personal responsibility for those failures." A reporter interrupted. "Mr. Caldwell, Richard Spence says he raised concerns about your complaint handling system 18 months ago and was told to let HR handle it. He says you personally oversaw the decision not to act." "Is that true?" Caldwell's jaw clenched. "I made decisions based on the information available to me at the time." "The information available to you included 5 complaints about Susan Whitmore. It included a 47-page whistleblower report. It included your own COO telling you the system was broken. What additional information did you need?" Caldwell looked at the reporter for a long time. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "I understand the anger. I share it, and I am committed to making this right. With all due respect, Mr. Caldwell, the Carter family's attorney has rejected 2 settlement offers. They do not believe you can make this right. Do you have a response to that? I respect the Carter family's decision, and I will continue to work toward a resolution that honors the severity of what occurred." The press conference lasted 12 minutes. When it ended, analysts noted something remarkable. At no point during those 12 minutes did Thomas Caldwell say the words, "I am sorry." He said he took responsibility. He said he was committed. He said he understood. But the 2 simplest words in the English language, "I am sorry," never left his mouth. That absence was noticed. It was clipped and shared and replayed. It became another viral moment, another crack in the airline's crumbling defense. People do not forgive corporations, but they especially do not forgive corporations that cannot even bring themselves to apologize. At 7:15, Danielle was sitting on her mother's porch in Dallas, watching the sun go down. Malik was inside watching a cartoon with Loretta. Marcus had gone to get dinner. For the first time in 3 days, Danielle was alone. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. It was a number she did not recognize, but it had a New York area code. She answered, "Miss Carter, my name is Rachel Torres. I was the flight attendant on your flight, the one who came to help after it happened." Danielle sat up. "I remember you." Rachel's voice was shaking. "I need you to know something. I need you to know that I filed a complaint about Susan 9 months ago. I told them she was dangerous. I told them she was going to hurt someone, and they ignored me. They sent her to 1 counseling session and put her back on the schedule." "I know," Danielle said. "My attorney has your complaint." "There is something else," Rachel said. And now she was crying. "The day of your flight, I was not supposed to be on that crew. I was assigned to a different route, but the original attendant called in sick, and they put me on Flight 728 at the last minute. When I saw Susan's name on the crew sheet, I went to my supervisor and asked to be reassigned. I told him I did not feel safe working with her. He told me to stop being dramatic and get on the plane." Danielle gripped the arm of the porch chair. "Miss Carter, if my supervisor had listened to me that morning, I would not have been on that flight. But Susan still would have been. She would have been on that plane with your son, and there would have been no one there who had already raised concerns about her. I keep thinking about that. I keep thinking about how many flights she worked when no one was watching. How many passengers she treated that way when no one was there to see it. Rachel Danielle said, "You tried. You tried more than once. This is not your fault. It feels like my fault. I was on that plane. I was in the back galley when she did it. If I had been standing closer, if I had been watching, maybe I could have stopped her." "You could not have stopped her," Danielle said. "The airline could have stopped her. Your supervisor could have stopped her. The CEO could have stopped her. 5 complaints could have stopped her. A 47-page report could have stopped her. But they all chose not to. You are not one of them, Rachel. You are the one person who tried." Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your attorney, Vanessa Cole, do you think she would talk to me?" "I think she would very much like to talk to you. I have documentation emails between me and my supervisor, screenshots of the crew assignment system showing that I requested reassignment the morning of your flight and was denied. I have everything. Send it to Vanessa tonight," Danielle said. "Every piece of it." "I will." "Miss Carter." "How is Malik?" Danielle looked through the window at her son, who was curled up on Loretta's couch with a blanket over his legs, laughing at something on the television. Laughing. The sound reached her through the glass and hit her so hard she had to press her hand against her chest. "He is watching cartoons with his grandmother. Danielle said he is laughing right now." Rachel started crying again. "Good. That is good. He deserves to laugh." At 8 o'clock, Vanessa called. She had received Rachel's documentation, all of it. The emails, the screenshots, the crew assignment records, the formal reassignment requests that had been denied the morning of Flight 728. Danielle. "This is devastating evidence. Rachel Torres asked to be taken off that flight specifically because of Susan Whitmore, and her supervisor denied the request. That means the airline had active real-time knowledge that an employee was considered dangerous by her own colleague on the day of the incident, and they still put her on that plane. What does this mean for the case? It means we are not just proving the airline ignored past complaints. We are proving they had a chance to prevent this specific incident on this specific day and chose not to. That is the difference between negligence and deliberate indifference. And deliberate indifference opens the door to punitive damages that will make their $50 million offer look like pocket change. At 9 o'clock, the airline's third settlement offer arrived. $150 million. Confidential. No admission of wrongdoing. Vanessa forwarded it to Danielle with a single line, "Your call." Danielle did not hesitate. No confidentiality. No sealed records. Everything comes out. At 9:30, something shifted in the story that no one saw coming. A journalist at the New York Times published an investigative piece that had been in the works for 24 hours. The article revealed that the airline's board of directors had received a summary of the whistleblower report 3 months before Hamilton and Rowe pulled their investment. The summary had been presented at a closed board meeting. Minutes from that meeting obtained by the Times showed that the board had voted to table the report for further review at a future meeting. That future meeting had never been scheduled. The board had received a 47-page document describing 60 incidents of discriminatory behavior, and they had voted to put it aside and deal with it later. Later never came. And 3 months after that vote, a flight attendant named in that report walked down the aisle of Flight 728 and split a child's head open. When the Times article dropped, 2 more board members resigned within the hour. The airline's board was now down to 3 members out of an original 11. The company was functionally ungovernable. At 10:15, Vanessa called Danielle one last time that night. "Danielle, I need to tell you something. The Times article has triggered a second DOT investigation separate from the first. This one is focused specifically on the board's handling of the whistleblower report. There is talk of congressional hearings. A senator from New York has already called for the CEO's resignation. This is no longer a lawsuit. This is a reckoning." Danielle sat on the edge of her mother's guest bed. Malik was asleep in the bed beside her, his dinosaur coloring book on the pillow next to him, his breathing slow and steady. "Vanessa, I need you to understand something. I am a 34-year-old woman from Brooklyn. I work in accounts receivable at a shipping company. I make $52,000 a year. 3 days ago, I was packing crayons into a backpack for a flight to see my mother. I am not an activist. I am not a public figure. I am a mother whose child was hurt. I know," Vanessa said, "but I am not going to stop. Not because I want attention, not because I want money, because my son asked me if he did something wrong. He asked me that 3 times. A 7-year-old boy who was sitting in his seat coloring dinosaurs asked his mother if he did something wrong after an adult slammed his head into a seat. And every time I think about stopping, every time I think about taking the money and going home and trying to forget, I hear him asking that question. And I know I cannot stop, because if I stop, the next mother will have to start from scratch. And I am not going to let that happen." "Then we do not stop," Vanessa said. "We go all the way. All the way." At 10:45, Danielle turned off her phone. She lay down beside Malik and put her arm over him. He shifted in his sleep and pressed his back against her the way he had done since he was a baby, always seeking her warmth, always trusting that she was there. She stared at the ceiling in the dark. She could hear her mother's television. Faintly through the wall, the murmur of news anchors still talking about her son, still showing his school photo, still replaying the video that had torn a corporation apart. Somewhere in New York, Thomas Caldwell was in his office, staring at resignation letters. Somewhere in Queens, Susan Whitmore was sitting in a holding cell, waiting for arraignment. Somewhere in a Bloomberg newsroom, a journalist was preparing the next story. Somewhere in Washington, a senator was drafting a letter calling for congressional oversight of the entire airline industry. And here, in a quiet house in Dallas, a 7-year-old boy slept beside his mother with a bandage on his forehead and a blue dinosaur named Justice drawn on a page inside a coloring book that had traveled from Brooklyn to 30,000 feet, to a hospital in St. Louis, to this bed, this moment, this fragile temporary peace. Danielle closed her eyes. Tomorrow the fight would continue. Tomorrow there would be more calls, more offers, more cameras, more questions. Tomorrow the world would keep turning, and the story would keep growing, and the pressure would keep building until something fundamental broke open and changed. But tonight, her son was breathing beside her. Tonight, he was safe, and that was enough to keep going. The trial began on a Monday in October, 4 months after Flight 728 Federal Courthouse in Dallas. Vanessa Cole had fought to keep it in Texas, close to where Malik was recovering, close to Loretta's house, close to the ground where Danielle had found her footing, and refused to be moved. The courtroom was packed, every seat taken press in the back, 2 rows. Cameras were not allowed inside, but sketch artists lined the gallery, their pencils moving fast as the proceedings opened. Danielle sat at the plaintiff's table in a navy blue dress her mother had helped her pick out the night before. Loretta had pressed it twice to make sure there were no wrinkles. "You walk in there looking like exactly who you are," Loretta had told her. "A mother. A good mother. That is all they need to see." Malik was not in the courtroom. Vanessa had advised against it, and Danielle agreed. He was at Loretta's house with Marcus, drawing dinosaurs, eating grilled cheese sandwiches, being 7 years old. That was where he needed to be. Across the aisle sat the airlines defense team, 6 lawyers in dark suits. Behind them sat Thomas Caldwell, who had not resigned despite calls from 3 senators, 2 governors, and a petition with 4 million signatures. He sat with his hands folded in his lap, staring straight ahead, the posture of a man who had been coached to show nothing. Vanessa stood for her opening statement. She walked to the center of the courtroom, looked at the jury, 12 ordinary people from Dallas County, and spoke without notes. 4 months ago, a 7-year-old boy named Malik Carter boarded a plane with his mother. He was carrying a backpack with crayons and a coloring book. He was going to visit his grandmother. He sat in his seat. He put on his seatbelt. He colored a picture of a dinosaur. And then a flight attendant named Susan Whitmore grabbed him by the back of his head and slammed his face into the seat in front of him. He bled. He screamed. He got 7 stitches and a concussion. He was 7 years old. She paused. The courtroom was silent. But this case is not just about what Susan Whitmore did. This case is about what the airline knew and what the airline chose. They knew Susan Whitmore had 5 prior complaints. They knew 3 of her own colleagues had reported her behavior. They knew a flight attendant named Rachel Torres requested reassignment on the morning of Flight 728 because she did not feel safe working with Susan, and her supervisor denied that request. They knew all of this because it was in their files, in their emails, in a 47-page whistleblower report that was presented to their board of directors 3 months before this happened. And they did nothing. They chose to do nothing. And a child paid the price. The airline's lead attorney, a man named Douglas Keating, stood for his opening. He was smooth practice, the kind of lawyer who had spent decades defending corporations. He acknowledged the incident was tragic and inexcusable. He said Susan Whitmore had acted alone, outside the scope of her duties, in violation of every policy the airline had in place. He said the airline had terminated her immediately. He said the airline was committed to change. This is a case about one individual's terrible action, Keating said, not about a company's values. Vanessa did not react. She had expected this argument. She had built her entire case to destroy it. The first witness was Michael Reynolds, the corporate attorney from row 19. He walked to the stand in a charcoal suit and took the oath with a steady hand. Vanessa asked him to describe what he had observed. I heard the flight attendant's voice rising. Michael said it was aggressive, disproportionate. I could see a small child in the window seat looking frightened. His mother was trying to de-escalate. She was calm. She was respectful. And then the flight attendant reached past, the mother grabbed the boy, and drove his head forward into the seat back. The sound was something I will never forget. I have heard a lot of things in courtrooms. I have never heard anything like that. Did you begin recording before or after the physical contact? Vanessa asked. Before. I started recording when I heard her voice escalating because something felt wrong. My instinct told me this was going to go bad. I was right. The video was played for the jury. 42 seconds. No sound in the courtroom except the audio from Michael's phone. The jury watched Susan grab Malik. They watched the impact. They heard the crack. They heard Danielle scream. They watched Susan step back and straighten her uniform. One juror, a grandmother in the front row, put her hand over her mouth. Another juror, a man in his 60s, closed his eyes and did not open them until the video ended. Tasha Bennett testified, next the former Air Force medic. She described the wound in clinical detail. 2-inch laceration consistent with blunt force trauma bleeding that required sustained pressure signs of mild concussion, including glazed eyes and delayed responses. She described asking Malik his name and his favorite color to assess his cognitive function. He answered every question, Tasha said. He was cooperative. He was polite. He called me ma'am while I was holding gauze to his bleeding head. That is the kind of child he is. On the second day, Rachel Torres took the stand. She was nervous. Her hands trembled as she was sworn in. But when Vanessa asked her first question, Rachel's voice found its strength. I filed a complaint about Susan Whitmore 9 months before Flight 728. Rachel said, I described her behavior as unpredictable hostility towards certain passengers. I gave specific examples. I asked for her to be evaluated. I was told the matter would be reviewed. 1 counseling session. That was it. 1 session, and she was back on the schedule. What happened on the morning of Flight 728? Vanessa asked. I was reassigned to that flight at the last minute. When I saw Susan's name on the crew sheet, I went to my supervisor, Daniel Marsh, and asked to be moved to a different flight. I told him I did not feel comfortable working with her. I told him I had filed the complaint. He told me to stop being dramatic and get on the plane. Those were his exact words. Stop being dramatic. Yes, stop being dramatic and get on the plane. I remember every word because I stood there thinking something is going to happen on this flight. And I was right. And I was in the back alley when it did. And I did not even know until I heard the screaming. Rachel broke down. She pressed her palms against her eyes and cried on the witness stand. The judge offered her a moment. She took it. She wiped her eyes, straightened her back, and said, "I am ready to continue." Vanessa's next question was quiet, deliberate. "Rachel, if your supervisor had honored your reassignment request that morning, would Susan Whitmore still have been on that flight?" "Yes," Rachel said. "Removing me would not have removed her. The only person who could have removed Susan was management, and they chose not to." On the third day, Vanessa called Gloria Mendes, the Latina mother from 14 months earlier. Gloria walked to the stand carrying a folder. Inside were photographs of her daughter Sophia's arm taken 2 days after the incident with Susan Whitmore. A bruise, dark purple in the shape of fingers on the arm of a 5-year-old girl. "I filed a complaint," Gloria said. "I provided these photos. I provided my daughter's pediatrician records. The airline told me the matter had been reviewed and resolved. Nobody called me back. Nobody apologized. Nobody told me what had been done. My daughter had nightmares for 6 months. She screamed every time she saw an airplane in the sky. She is 6 now, and she still will not fly." Gloria looked at the jury. "When I saw the video of Malik, I felt sick, because I knew 14 months ago that Susan Whitmore was dangerous. I told them. I gave them proof, and they did nothing. If they had listened to me, that boy would not be hurt right now." The defense tried to cross-examine Gloria, questioning the accuracy of her recollection, suggesting the bruise could have been from normal childhood play. Gloria did not flinch. "I know what my daughter told me. I know what I saw on her arm. And I know what finger-shaped bruises look like. Do you?" The courtroom was silent. On the 4th day, Vanessa called her most devastating witness, Richard Spence, the former chief operating officer who had resigned during the crisis. Spence walked to the stand with the weight of a man carrying years of compromise he could no longer bear. "I raised concerns about the crew complaint system in March of the previous year," Spence said. "I presented data to the CEO showing that passengers of color filed complaints at 3 times the rate of white passengers, but those complaints were resolved in favor of the employee at nearly double the rate. The disparity was clear. It was documented. I recommended an independent audit." "What was the CEO's response?" Vanessa asked. "He told me to let HR handle it. He said an external audit would create legal exposure and negative press. He said the numbers were not significant enough to warrant disruption." "Not significant enough," Vanessa repeated. Those were his words. The data showed a clear pattern of racial bias in how complaints were handled, and the CEO said it was not significant enough. The jury looked at Thomas Caldwell. He did not move. He did not blink. But something behind his eyes shifted, the kind of imperceptible change that happens when a man realizes that the walls he built to protect himself are now the walls closing in. On the 5th day, Vanessa made her closing argument. She stood before the jury and spoke for 47 minutes. She walked them through every failure, every ignored complaint, every dismissed warning, every decision that prioritized cost over safety, convenience over justice, corporate image over a child's life. "The defense wants you to believe this is about one person," Vanessa said. "One rogue employee, one terrible moment. But you have heard the evidence. 5 complaints, a whistleblower report, with 60 documented incidents, a COO who was told to look the other way, a flight attendant who begged to be reassigned and was told to stop being dramatic, a mother from 14 months ago who brought photographs of her daughter's bruises and was told the matter was resolved. This is not one person. This is a culture, a choice, a pattern of decisions made by people who decided that some passengers mattered less than others, and that protecting the company was more important than protecting a child." She turned and looked at Danielle. Danielle Carter did everything right. She booked her tickets. She packed her son's bag. She arrived early. She put him in his seat. She buckled his seatbelt. She did everything a mother is supposed to do. And it was not enough because the system that was supposed to keep her son safe had already decided long before he boarded that plane that his safety was not a priority. She turned back to the jury. "Malik Carter is 7 years old. He likes the color green. He draws dinosaurs for his grandmother. He says, "Yes, ma'am," and "No, sir." After a grown woman slammed his head into a seat hard enough to require 7 stitches, the first thing he asked his mother was whether he did something wrong. That question should haunt every person in this room. It should haunt this airline, and it should tell you everything you need to know about who the real victim is, in this case, and who needs to be held accountable. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They returned a verdict of liable on all counts. Negligence failure to protect a minor, racial discrimination, deliberate indifference. They awarded Danielle and Malik Carter $370 million, $220 million in compensatory damages, $150 million in punitive damages. It was one of the largest civil rights verdicts against an airline in American history. When the verdict was read, Danielle did not cry. She did not celebrate. She sat at the plaintiff's table with her hands flat on the surface and breathed. Just breathed in and out the way she had breathed on that plane while holding napkins against her son's bleeding head. Vanessa put a hand on her shoulder. "We did it. Malik did it." Danielle said he did it by being exactly who he is. Thomas Caldwell resigned the following morning. His statement was 3 sentences. He did not use the word sorry. 2 weeks later, the airline announced a complete restructuring of its employee oversight system, independent audits, mandatory bias training, a zero-tolerance policy for physical contact with passengers, a new board of directors, a new CEO, the first black woman to lead a major American airline, a former federal aviation regulator named Patricia Okafor, who had spent her career fighting for exactly the kind of reforms that were now being implemented under the weight of a court order and public outrage. Hamilton and Rowe Capital released a statement. The $20 billion investment would be reinstated contingent on verified implementation of structural reforms. Catherine Rose said in a press interview, "Money should follow values. When this airline demonstrates that it has changed not just in policy, but in practice, we will be back, not before." Susan Whitmore pleaded guilty to felony assault of a minor. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison and 3 years of probation. At her sentencing hearing, her attorney asked the judge for leniency, citing her 22 years of service. The judge, a 64-year-old woman named Margaret Chen, looked at Susan and said, "2 years of service does not entitle you to 22 seconds of violence against a child." 3 months after the verdict, Danielle launched a nonprofit called Safe Passage. Its mission was to protect children of color in public travel spaces, airplanes, buses, trains, and the systems that govern them. The organization partnered with civil rights groups, airline unions, and federal agencies. Within its first year, Safe Passage had trained over 4,000 flight attendants, bus drivers, and transit workers in de-escalation, bias recognition, and child safety protocols. Danielle did not do it for the attention. She did it because of the question Malik kept asking. Did I do something wrong? She did it so that no other child would ever have to ask that question after being hurt by someone who was supposed to keep them safe. 6 months after the trial, Danielle and Malik flew together for the first time since Flight 728. It was a short flight Dallas to Houston for a Safe Passage event at a children's hospital. Malik had not wanted to go. He had stood in the airport terminal, gripping Danielle's hand so hard his knuckles turned white, staring at the departure board with wide, frightened eyes. "Mama, what if it happens again?" Danielle knelt down so she was eye level with him. "It will not happen again. And you know why? Because of you. Because you were brave. Because you told the truth. Because what happened to you changed things. Real things. The people on this airplane have been trained differently because of what you went through. You made that happen, Malik." He looked at her. His eyes were still scared, but there was something else in them now. Something that had not been there before the plane, before the blood, before the courtroom. It was strength, the quiet, earned kind, that comes not from never being hurt, but from surviving what hurt you and choosing to keep going. "Okay," he said, "let us go." They boarded the plane. They found their seats, row 14, window, and middle. Malik sat by the window. He reached into his backpack and pulled out his coloring book, a new one Loretta had given him, and opened it to a page with a Tyrannosaurus Rex. A flight attendant walked down the aisle, doing her pre-flight check. She stopped at row 14, looked at Malik, and smiled. "That is a great dinosaur," she said. "What is his name?" Malik looked up at her. He studied her face for a moment, the way children do when they are deciding whether an adult is safe. Then he smiled, the gap-toothed grin, the one Danielle had not seen in months. "His name is Justice," Malik said. The flight attendant laughed softly. "That is the best name I have ever heard." She moved on. Malik went back to coloring. Danielle watched him for a moment. This small boy with a scar on his forehead and a crayon in his hand. And she felt something open in her chest. Not pain this time, but something wider. Something like hope. The plane took off. It climbed through clear Texas sky and leveled out above the clouds. Malik looked out the window at the white expanse below them. And for the first time since that day, he did not flinch. He did not grab the armrest. He just looked. "Mama," he said, "it is pretty up here." "Yes, baby, it is." He went back to his drawing. Green crayon, careful lines staying inside the borders the way he always did. But now the borders felt different. Not like limits, like choices, his choices. At the Safe Passage event that evening, Danielle spoke to a room full of parents, transit workers, and advocates. She talked about the flight. She talked about the blood. She talked about the 47-page report, and the 5 dismissed complaints, and the $20 billion that moved faster than justice. She talked about all of it with the same clarity she had carried since that first press conference outside the hospital in St. Louis. And then she said something that silenced the room. "People ask me if I am angry. I was. But anger is fuel, not a destination. I did not fight this battle so I could stay angry forever. I fought it so my son could fly again without being afraid. I fought it so the next mother does not have to hold napkins against her child's head and beg a captain to land the plane. I fought it because the systems that are supposed to protect us were broken, and broken, things do not fix themselves. People fix them. Decisions fix them. Refusing to be silent fixes them." She paused and looked toward the side of the room where Malik was sitting with Marcus, coloring in his book, oblivious to the hundreds of people watching his mother reshape a national conversation. "My son told me something after the trial." Danielle said, "I asked him what he wanted people to remember about this story. He thought about it for a long time, the way he does very carefully, and then he said, 'I want them to remember that I did not do anything wrong.'" She let those words hang in the air. He is right. He did not do anything wrong. He never did, and no child should ever have to prove that. Not on an airplane, not in a classroom, not in a hospital, not anywhere. That is what Safe Passage is about. That is what this fight is about. Not punishment, not revenge. Protection. Simple, basic protection for children who deserve to be seen as children. The room stood. Every person in it. They stood and they stayed, standing until Danielle stepped away from the microphone. Malik looked up from his coloring book. He saw the people standing. He saw his mother walking toward him. He did not fully understand why everyone was on their feet, but he understood the look on his mother's face. It was the same look she had given him on the plane, the same look from the hospital, the same look from every moment since. It was the look that said, "I got you, baby. I will always have you." He held up his drawing, a green Tyrannosaurus Rex with big teeth and tiny arms, and the word justice written underneath in wobbly 7-year-old letters. Danielle took it. She looked at it. She pressed it against her chest. And she knew, standing in that room, holding her son's drawing, that what had started in seat 22B at 30,000 feet had become something that no corporation could buy back, no settlement could silence, and no amount of turbulence could ever shake loose. Because sometimes justice does not begin in a courtroom or a boardroom or a congressional hearing. Sometimes it begins with a mother who refuses to let go, a child who tells the truth, and 5 words that no one on that plane will ever forget.